Hey y'all. I am so excited. This is also the first time I've done a webinar via uh, YouTube Live. So bear with me if anything is like off or different or anything. So, can y'all hear me? For those of you who are here right now, can you hear me? Let me know if you can hear me. You can just put it in the comments if you can hear me. Yay! Okay, great. Yay, you can hear me. Okay, so I'm excited. While we wait, I'm gonna give people like a few minutes to just join us. While we wait, though, let me know who you are, where you're from, how far along you are. Is this the first baby? Do you know what you're having? All the stuff that we all want to share about our pregnancies. So, share. Please do share so I know. And for y'all to also meet each other. That's also important in this whole process, too. So, please do share so that we know who's here. Yay, 28 weeks. And you're having a girl. That's exciting. Australia, yay! 35 weeks, first baby. Oh, y'all are like in the third trimester. Yay. 36 weeks, Fort Worth. Yay. DFW, Dallas, New Year's Eve. Oh, that's exciting. Baby boy. There's a lot of baby girls in here. Oh, okay. We're evening out. Baby boy. Okay. I love it. I love it. I'm so excited. All right, y'all. El Salvador. Hey, 21 weeks. Awesome. I love it. Y'all, I'm super excited because um it is one of my passions to really kind of make childbirth education very succinct and very streamlined and very easy because I'm not a firm believer that preparing for pregnancy needs to be difficult, if that makes any sense. I really do not like when I see a lot of mamas going down these Google rabbit holes and they're just trying to like look in all of these different places for all this information when if you just had one place to find everything or to kind of streamline the research because there's so much information out there that you can get that's not effective for your pregnancy, and it can literally kind of take you down this rabbit hole of like all of these things that actually aren't conducive to preparing you for a natural, positive, beautiful, and empowering birth experience. So this is going to be a really fun webinar for me to do because I'm kind of going to give you a little bit of an insight as to how I teach my moms how to plan for birth. If you followed me at all up to this point, you kind of have an idea of my outlook on birth. But this is going to kind of bring it all together. And what I'm going to do is by tomorrow, y'all will have my updated birth plan template so that you can utilize it. Now, of course, there's still other information that you're still going to want to look into and do some research on for yourself. But for the most part, it will kind of give you an idea of some things that you should be thinking about. So, want to jump in. Thank y'all for being here. You're in the right place if you desire to have a positive and beautiful birth experience. Because if you're here, I'm assuming it's because you want to see birth or you might see birth in a positive light. You're also in the right place if you've allowed other people's birth stories to kind of cause doubt. If we're being honest with each other, y'all, like we've all heard those negative birth stories before for whatever reason. Like when we get pregnant, for some reason, people just decide that, oh, let me come share with you like my negative birth story, not really understanding why that is the thing, but it is. And so if any of you have been in my shoes before, you know that some people will flock to you, and sometimes like hearing some of those stories, especially if they're on repeat, can kind of be overwhelming and cause you to doubt that beautiful births even exist. So I want to utilize this to remind you and help you learn that with education, you can always know that your birth can be beautiful even if it doesn't go exactly as planned. You're also here and you're in the right place if you might carry some level of fear around birth, right? That's still normal, right? Just because we are looking to have a beautiful, positive birth experience doesn't mean that some fear might still exist. Doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It means that we just haven't necessarily worked through everything that we need to work through. So hopefully, once I share with some of the process with y'all, you will kind of get an idea of like what do I need to be doing so that I can eliminate that fear, because my last desire for any of you is that you would be walking into birth with any level of fear. If you walk into birth with any level of fear, that means that you have not educated yourself enough. So, with fear, typically you see a lack of knowledge and education. So this is going to be the first step for y'all to hopefully eliminate some of those fears. And then you're in the right place if you have a birth plan already. But if you are in a situation where you have a birth plan and then if something were to change off of that birth plan, you would know what to do. It's okay if you're there. That was me in my first pregnancy. But if that is you, you're in the right place because we're going to work through that. Now, I want to be very clear on the other side. If you are here and you believe the phrase of it's going to be what it's going to be, or it is what it is when it comes to birth, this is not the place for you, because that mentality, while we are always going to be flexible and we're going to follow our body's lead, that's actually a not so great mindset to have when it comes to birth, especially when it comes to birth planning, because it is what it is goes along the lines of like, I don't really care what happens or I don't know what's going to happen. And you actually don't have to walk into birth feeling like there's any unknowns, because if you actually educate yourself and you know what to expect from birth, there really isn't many unknowns that can happen. You may not know exactly how your birth is going to play out, but you know how to navigate multiple situations. This is also not the place for you if you are not willing to put in the work. Anybody who's worked with me before, any of my doula clients, any of the mamas who have taken this course know that it takes work to prepare for birth. It takes work to prepare your mind, to prepare your body, to educate yourself, to know your options. You have to be willing to put in the work, because any other thing that you care about, you put the work in for, and that does not change when it comes to birth. So if you're not willing to do the work, which creating the birth plan and the process that I'm going to share with you is going to take you a little bit of work, but if you do it, I promise you, it will pay off. Now, this is also not the place for you if you don't know if you're going to be able to think clearly without, or let me rephrase that. This is not the place for you if you think that you'll be able to really like process clearly like you would right now, like you're listening to this, when you're in the midst of labor. Um, Sometimes we can defer to our partners or our doulas or anybody else in labor, like who's supporting us, if something changes. And that is absolutely important and necessary. But those people cannot necessarily make the decision that you feel like is best in your gut. So it's important that when you are preparing, that even if you don't memorize all of this stuff, that at least you have some sort of like familiarity with it, so that if your doula or your partner or somebody brings it up, it's not the first time that you've heard about it. Okay. So just keep those things in mind. Now, I want to promise you something. I will provide, just like I do on Instagram, I'm going to provide you with practical information. I'm not here to just fluff all this stuff and make it sound good. I am going to give you concrete steps to create a birth plan that's actually going to work for you, and it's actually going to help you be prepared to walk into your birth fearless. I'm also very, very confident in this formula because it's been tested by many mamas. This is not the first time that I've come up with this thing. I did it for my birth and it helped. All of my doula clients do this and it has supported them. They have all had positive birth experiences, even the ones that did not have the birth that they necessarily planned for, but they weren't necessarily surprised either because they planned for that too. And then, of course, after tonight, I promise you that you will walk away being able to come up with a very concrete, strong birth plan that you can walk through with your provider, and it's going to help prepare you for multiple birth scenarios. That is the goal here, is that you are being prepared for multiple birth scenarios. Okay. Now, if y'all don't know who I am, my name is Chanel. I am a mama of two. I am a wife. I am a childbirth educator, which is part of the reason that you're here. I'm a doula. I'm a virtual doula and a birth doula in person. And when I am not doing all of those things, I am actually probably practicing some of these labor positions, labor techniques, these breathing techniques for myself because, it helps in so many other areas of life and with my kids because I'm just obsessed with birth and pregnancy and babies. So, honestly, this is kind of like my hobby and it's like the thing that I do for a living. So, I love it and every time I get something new or I learn something new, I'm going to be sharing it with y'all. So, just constantly know that whenever you come and you work with me or you interact or you engage or you get educated by me that I'm always giving you whatever I am learning as I learn it because it's important. If it's important for me to know, it's important for you to know too. So I want to just go back to where this whole thing started and like why I'm here and why I'm even talking about this tonight. And for those of you who don't know my birth story, I do have both of my birth stories posted on my YouTube channel, both with my first pregnancy and my second birth. So you can always go back and watch like the full videos of those. But where this whole thing started. So I was pregnant with my first in 2017, and I was very determined to have an unmedicated birth. So I was doing all the things, following all the pages on Instagram. Really wasn't there wasn't a huge natural birth movement that I was aware of on Instagram at that time. But I was following the people that I knew. I was in these Facebook groups. I was following my What to Expect app and the Bump app. And I was doing all this research online. And obviously, you hear everybody's stories through, friends and family. And through that, because I was like fit and I ate healthy and I was doing all the right things, I had like a very textbook like pregnancy. I was like, I have the most perfect birth plan and I'm going to be able to accomplish this. Like, you're not going to be able to tell me anything. I'm going to have this birth. I'm going to do what I need to do. It's going to be amazing. Like, coming to me with these negative birth stories, like, that's a waste of time because I'm definitely going to be doing this natural birth and I'm not going to need anything. All of you guys are going to be surprised by how great I do. But then I then my labor actually started very differently because my water broke. And I was in the middle of a meeting and my water broke at work and I'm like, "Okay, this is not going as planned at all." Wasn't nervous, wasn't scared at all. I was excited because I was about to meet my baby very soon and I didn't know that your water breaking was actually not as common as it sounds or you see in the movies. So I was like, okay, we're about to have a baby. And like my water broke, but I wasn't having contractions. So I'm like, yeah, I'm really prepared for this. But then once I actually realized what was happening, went to see my provider, and then they rushed us to the hospital to reduce our risk of infection. At that point, because nothing was going according to plan, I wasn't able to go home. Thankfully, we had our bags in the car already. I started to feel lost because everything changed from the birth that I put on paper. Everything was different from literally the way that it started. And I started to feel kind of out of control because nothing that I thought that I knew was actually helping me in that moment. And again, I had a really solid birth plan. I knew how I wanted to push. I knew how to breathe. I knew all of these things, or at least I thought that I did. And it was going to be what helped me have a quick labor. But when all of that changed, my water broke, and then I ended up being induced because my body was not dilated at all. And there were no contractions. Everything started to make me feel like, oh, wow, I actually need help. And I don't have any of that. So because nothing looked like what I planned on paper, I didn't have I realized I didn't have like this reliable education that I thought. I was so confident, but it was like a blind optimism because I thought that I knew everything and I thought that my body was prepared. I thought that my mind was prepared. But in reality, when things went differently than what I put on paper and all of the things that I studied for, which was like a one track mind, I ended up becoming kind of at the mercy of the people who were supporting me and the hospital staff that was supporting me in labor at that point because I had no idea what was going on. And I realized like my birth plan had kind of gone out of the window. And so at that point, I just kind of felt like I had to listen to whatever was like being told to me or suggested to me. The only thing that I stood my ground on was I'm not getting an epidural. I'm not getting an epidural. So I was pushing through and I was pushing through and I was bracing myself for each, contraction, which obviously in that moment, I also realized I wasn't really physically prepared to actually labor smart. I just knew, oh, I'm strong and I'm fit and I have endurance, but that actually did not benefit me in the labor process. Um, I realized in that whole process, like I only knew enough to get me through this perfect birth plan that I put on paper. And that actually wasn't beneficial for me because, as you all probably know, birth plans are written in pencil. Like it doesn't always go as perfectly as we put it on paper. And that doesn't mean it's negative. It doesn't mean that, we're not like going to have a beautiful positive birth experience. It just simply means that things can change and things can have to be modified and adjusted and that's okay. But if you're not prepared for that, and I was not, it can lead you down like this cascade of interventions. And that was what happened to me. And I ended my first pregnancy and birth in an emergency C-section because, again, I didn't know how to navigate anything. I didn't really know how to advocate for myself. So the second time around, I knew very early on, I was like, I have to do things differently. I had no idea what was going on. And I just had to like go with the flow of whatever other people were telling me. And that was a process. It was a process for me to learn all of the things I needed to learn in order to have this positive birth experience. My second birth actually consisted of no fears. After I was able to start learning and educating myself and getting the proper support, I actually spent way less time in labor. That blind optimism, like I was telling y'all about, where I was just super, super confident, but not it was like an educated confidence. It was like an ignorant confidence. That turned from blind optimism to informed optimism. I was actually excited and confident because I knew what to expect pretty much from any angle and I knew how to navigate that. And I knew like how to be able to advocate for myself and make informed decisions and all of these things. And that's what I want for you. I want you to be able to have an easy, empowering, euphoric birth experience. And that was what I was able to experience that second time around. But the only reason that that was true is because I prepared ahead of time. I knew more about birthing in the hospital, even though I was having a birth center birth. That was the plan. I knew more about birthing in the hospital when I was giving birth at a birth center than I did when I was actually birthing in the hospital. So that goes to show like the different types of preparation that happen and the different type of education that happened from this traumatic birth experience the first time around, even though it was unlikely that I would even engage with hospital staff or have access to any of those medical interventions. That was not even close to being a real reality for me, but I was educated on all of those things so that if I were to get transferred, right, or if I needed an epidural, or if somebody needed to break my water, that I knew when those things would be necessary and I knew the benefits and the risks of whatever decision that I might make. So I was just so excited and I was so fearless, and that all paid off because I was aware of my options and I was aware of what interventions would be necessary when something was medically necessary versus when somebody might just be trying to coerce me or scare me into making a decision that might be more convenient for them, but not for me. So I had to learn, and this is what we're going to talk about. I had to learn how to actually make an effective birth plan that actually allowed me to remain in control. Because what we need to understand throughout your entire pregnancy and birth experience is that while we don't necessarily have control over everything, there is a lot that we do have control over. And one of those things is information. We do have control over what information and education that we receive or that we even do on our own. And then the type of support that we have surrounding us. Creating a birth plan, while some people feel like, oh, it doesn't matter because it could change. Yes, that is absolutely true. But your birth plan is your voice. Okay. So that's what I want y'all to keep in mind when we're talking about birth plans. Yes, things can change, but your birth plan is your voice. And we need something that is formally documented to be your voice because in labor, your goals, and hopefully the people around you are going to be able to support you to get to that goal, is that you're focusing in on your baby and focusing in on your body. You're not over here answering a ton of questions during your labor experience because that can completely take you out of your birth zone. You need this document to speak for you. You need this document for your partner to advocate for so that we have all of your desires and your wishes and goals on this paper so that you and your healthcare provider or your nurses and everybody else in that environment are on the same page with what you want. Now, of course, things could change, but that's why we also have to have multiple plans. And so we're going to talk about that. But also having a birth plan, even if it doesn't go as planned, can actually minimize disappointments because if something changes, the way that we're going to learn how to actually put a birth plan together tonight is that it'll minimize disappointments and eliminate any conflicts or miscommunication between you and the staff or the providers that you're with because it will provide clear direction for everybody in the room. Like, for example, if you say, I don't want to have any cervical exams. Well, if it's clearly stated and written on your birth plan and everybody in the room knows that, it should be very easy and clear that this person is going to not kind of badger you or push you to get cervical exams, right? If they do, your partner, your support person can easily step in and say, hey, she doesn't want any cervical exams. If she does, she'll request them. Okay. Unless it's medically necessary, it's very clear here that that's not what she desires. So, this is your voice when you don't need to be using your voice for anything other than focusing in on your body and your baby and communicating whatever needs that you may need in that moment. Okay. So, that's the whole reason that this birth plan is even important. So, the first step in having this empowered and fearless birth, which is what I prepare my mamas for, is understanding your rights. Okay. If you're going to create a strong and effective birth plan that works, it has to be on the basis of your birthing rights. If you do not know your birthing rights or you're creating a birth plan without those birthing rights in mind, you could actually be putting yourself in a situation to kind of be at the mercy and hands of the people around you because somebody can say, oh, well, no, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do that. But that could be completely going against your birthing rights. And then at that point, your birth plan has changed simply because you didn't know your birthing rights, right? So, we're going to do a little game real quick. And I want y'all to respond to me in the chat so that I can see how much y'all know about some birthing rights. I do go over all of these birthing rights in the course, but I want to see, do y'all know some of your birthing rights? So you can just put myth or truth in the chat. Okay. So the first little riddle, if you will, is truth or myth. You cannot control how many people, staff, nurses, etc., are in your delivery room. Okay, obviously, I know that there are some limitations with COVID and things like that, but let's pretend that doesn't exist because that would obviously, you know, be very clear on limitations. So, no, you know, COVID limitations, considered. That's right. That is a myth. So you can actually control how many people, staff, nurses, residents are in your room. And the reason that I bring this up as one of your birthing rights is because in your birth plan, when it comes to your ambiance, and this is going to be something that you see in the birth plan that I'm going to send over, is that one of the important things that I have seen in successful births and in the ambiance is when there's as few interruptions as possible. But when you're birthing in certain environments, it can become very, very disruptive and it can become much louder, and people can be walking in and out of the room like every 15 minutes, and that can really throw you off. So what you can put in your birth plan is you can say, hey, I want as few people in the room as possible. I don't want any residents a part of my labor experience. If you don't, you can say, I want as few interruptions, as few questions asked to me as possible. If you have questions, ask my partner. Like, these are the things that you can kind of put into your birth plan. But if you don't know that birthing right, and you don't include that in your birth plan, what can end up happening is you have all these people coming in and out, and somebody can say to you, oh, well, I'm really sorry, but like we have to have X number of people in the room, or we have to have the resident in here just in case they can be observant. Da, da. That's not true. The truth is you have control over who's in the room. So if you just want it to be your provider, the charge nurse, or whatever nurse you're assigned to, a support nurse, and your partner, like these are things, and then your doula, these are things that you can advocate for. And you can put those things in your birth plan so that it's very clear and that you have that documented. Okay, next question, or truth or myth. Baby's newborn exam, like when they do their height, their weight, they check all of the baby's vitals and things like that. It must be done immediately after you give birth so that they get the most accurate reading of everything. So when they take baby to the warmer and they do weight and height and all those kinds of things, that has to be done immediately after. Is that truth or myth? Good. Yes, it is a myth. Good. Y'all are good. Y'all are getting on here. So another part of your birth plan is, what does newborn care look like? Okay. What kind of exams, what kind of vaccines, what kind of care do you want your baby in? Do you want the golden hour? Do you want to go immediately skin to skin? Unless there's a medical emergency, even though it's more convenient for your providers and your nurses to kind of get those like newborn assessments out of the way so that they can move on to the next room. That's not necessary. And it's also really not beneficial for baby to be taken to the warmer unless there's a medical reason. So when it comes to actually putting these things in your birth plan, it's very important that you understand, again, your rights, because you know that unless there's a medical reason, baby should be coming skin to skin with you immediately. That's what all of the research and documents and everything that you'll read about skin to skin, immediate skin to skin, the golden hour, you'll see that there's a benefit for you and for baby's health when baby comes skin to skin with you immediately. So it's important that if, of course, they're going to check baby's temperature, heart rate, and all those things, but that can actually be done while baby's skin to skin with you. They're not going to lose a ton of weight in the first hour or two. They're not going to get shorter or taller in the first hour or two. Nothing is really going to change. You're not nursing your baby like to where they're gaining 6 ounces after you nurse them for the first time before they go get weighed. So just keep those things in mind so that when you are putting this birth plan together, that you're very clear and that your partner and everybody around you knows how to help advocate for what you're wanting on your birth plan. Okay, next is you have to get vaginal exams throughout labor so the staff know how dilated you are. Is that truth or is that a myth? What do y'all think? You have to get them if you are in a hospital setting or anywhere so that people know how far along you are. Yeah, that's right. It is a myth. One of the things that is the most frustrating for me as a doula is how many times I see providers and nurses really pressure moms into getting cervical exams. Now, if the mom wants to know that information, then that's totally fine. But if she doesn't want to know that information because there's a lot of reasons why she might not want to know that information. There's also a lot of, benefits to just allowing your body to labor and not thinking about a number, because dilation actually isn't that important when it comes to actually progressing in labor. If you don't know that and you don't notate that in your birth plan, you can end up getting pressured a lot throughout labor if they don't feel like you are progressing quick enough. Or they may say, well, we want to just see if you've progressed, or we want to see how far along you are. Or we want to see da da da. And I understand that you may have to be, checked upon admittance to the hospital or birthing center, or wherever you're giving birth. However, when it comes to your birth plan and actually putting something together, sometimes you have to be very clear on some of these things, like cervical exams. You have to be very clear and say, I don't want to do this. If I do, I'll let you know. And unless there's a medical reason, which in most cases there's really not a true medical need to actually do a cervical exam unless, you know, we've clearly seen that nothing has changed in like 6 hours, or you're noticeably, seeing something that is a cause for concern, then in that case, there's really no reason for us to do cervical exams. And so we want to be very clear in our birth plans about that. This is just one of those examples, very simple example, but we need to be very clear about that in our birth plans. But you have to know your rights, because sometimes we'll get so pressured. It's like, oh, it's okay. Like you can just stand here and I'll just take care of it. No, I don't, it's not necessary. I'm good. There's other ways that I can know like how far I'm progressing. So we talk about that in the course as well. But you don't need those things, but you have to be very clear so that you can advocate for yourself. Because if you're just putting something on a birth plan, you're like, yeah, I watched this video on Instagram and they talked about, yeah, we shouldn't do cervical exams because, this 15-second reel that you watched on Instagram, but you actually have no idea why you're saying no to this thing. That becomes a problem, because then the one time that you say no to somebody and then they come back at you with all these scary statistics or these scary things, or, well, we don't know what's going on with your baby, or we don't know all these things, but you are like in the midst of labor and everything has been going fine. But now all of a sudden you get scared. And now all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait, maybe I do need to know. That means you're not educated enough. That just means that you just wrote something on your birth plan, but you actually don't have the weight behind the decision that you made, if that makes any sense. So I want y'all to know that when you are putting these birth plans together, it's important not to just put it on paper, but you have to understand your rights alongside of these things if it's actually going to be effective. Okay. Between the two birth experiences that I had, I really did do a lot of digging and researching and, utilizing my own experiences to come up with this approach to birth planning so that you do have more control. What research has shown us is that the more control or in control a mama feels, whether we're actually in control or not, because most of us are really not that much in control. But if we feel like we're in control, you end up having a much more positive birth experience. So I'm going to break this down into 3 steps on how we're actually going to put this birth plan together. Okay. Now, again, let me go back to what we talked about at the beginning. Some people will tell you, you don't need a birth plan, just like go and just go with the flow, because things can change. But what if the birth plan that you put together actually counted for those changes, right? What if your birth plan actually helped guide you through different birth scenarios instead of just your ideal birth scenario? So when I'm talking to you about this 3-step process, that is actually what I am preparing you for, okay? I had to take a different approach a second time, because just putting together an ideal birth plan, even though everything seemed to be setting up for itself to be a perfect birth that second time around, I still had to prepare myself for more than just what the ideal situation was. So that leads me to point number 2, right? Point number 1 is we have to know our birthing rights so that we can build a foundation and a birth plan off of solid education. The second thing is we have to actually understand all those interventions, right? We just went through some of those birth rates. Uh, but if there's an intervention, AKA somebody wanting to break your water, or you needing to be, or somebody suggesting induction to you, if you don't know anything about that and that's the first time you're hearing about it, that's going to be a problem. And that was the situation that I was in the first time around. I was like, induction, what is this? I don't even think about induction because my body was supposed to go into labor on its own. Well, I wasn't even given the opportunity for my body to go into labor on its own. So now I'm like really out of the loop and I do not feel in control at all. So in order to be prepared for birth, you have to know what could be presented to you, even if it doesn't. And of course, we don't want these things to be presented to us, especially if we're trying to have unmedicated births. But we have to know how to navigate these multiple scenarios, because if they come up, it's going to allow you to become more confident in how to respond to them. That is called advocacy. Okay. And you and your support person, your partner, your doula, all of the people, your parent, whoever's in the room with you, needs to understand this information. Because if somebody is coming to you, for example, and you've been in labor and we can tell that you're progressing, But somebody comes in and because they feel like it's taking longer than what they desire, they're like, well, maybe if we just break your water, like it might be good for us to break your water because you've been here for about 6 hours and it doesn't seem like you're maybe that close to pushing. So maybe if we break your water, because I see that you're working really hard, baby will just, descend really quickly and we can push baby out. I would really love to like, and I've heard this before, I would really love to deliver your baby like while I'm still on shift. Okay, that's a medical intervention. And if you don't know about AROM, which is artificial rupture of membranes, which is another way of saying breaking your water, if you don't know anything about that intervention, you could be stuck between a rock and a hard place, meaning like, yeah, I want to meet my baby. Of course, let's just speed this thing up. But then also not understanding and realizing the risks of somebody breaking your water, right? And what can come alongside of that, like fetal distress or infection or other things that could happen as a result of breaking your water. Sometimes it's the best option and sometimes it's not. But unless you have that information and you understand these interventions, and even though you may not have it all memorized, you've had some level of familiarity, and then you also know how to ask the right questions to get that information. And then, of course, if you have a doula or a support person, that also helps too. And that's again how I prepare my moms is like, we're going to talk about, even if you're having a home birth, we're going to talk about every single option that could be presented to you in case, for whatever reason, you get transferred to the hospital, whether it's in your choice or out of your control, and you're in the hospital and somebody suggests breaking your water. I mean, you can get your water broken at home with a midwife. You still need to understand these things so you can confidently make that decision and advocate for yourself. Um, like I told y'all before, I knew more about birthing in the hospital when I was actually scheduled to like give birth in a birth center than I did when I was actually planning to give birth in the hospital. I did take a hospital birthing course, but the course that I actually took with my birth center prepared me more than the hospital birthing course that I took. And because of that, I knew that I needed to be familiar with all of these sort of interventions that I didn't know how to advocate for the first time around in case, like I just said, I was transferred to the hospital. I still wanted to have a positive and beautiful birth experience, even if I ended up having to give birth in a different environment. And I did not want to walk into that environment lost because I was on such a one track mind, which I was the first time around. And so if that's you, it's okay, it's normal, but you still have time, even if you're 39 weeks right now, you still have time to really kind of solidify and strengthen your birth plan so that you know when things are medically necessary and when they're not. None of these decisions that you make in labor should be based out of fear. They should be based out of confidence. They should be based out of education. And you need that type of education to actually be able to make an informed decision. So, when we have fears, right? That ends up putting us in fear induced decision making, right? That's coercion by providers or staff that is, kind of telling us all of the bad things that can happen if we don't do this thing, but not necessarily mentioning the negatives or the risks associated with actually doing that thing, right? So, for example, with my second birth, I knew that having a repeat cesarean was a fear of mine. I mean, obviously, I wasn't going to have a cesarean in the birth center, but you hear all of these crazy things, especially as a VBAC, is like, well, what about uterine rupture? And what if something happens? And while I was really excited at the beginning, I still had this fear of like, well, what if I do have to have a repeat cesarean? So that to me made me realize, okay, if I have this fear of having a repeat cesarean, I actually need to educate myself on why I would need to have a repeat cesarean. Like, what would be the medical reasons for this intervention? And I had to start to educate myself, right? I started to learn that the medical reason for a C section was okay, there's fetal distress, right? Like, baby's heart rate is dropping, and we're doing all of these things to kind of help baby get back up to a stable place, and it's not working. And we've tried things. That's not after 5 minutes, but it's like, okay, we've changed positions. We've, hydrated. We've done all these things and baby still just isn't responding well. That could be a medical reason for a C-section. A transverse position of my baby, right? That's a medical reason. If I had HIV or placenta previa, or there was cord prolapse, meaning the cord came out of my body before my baby did, those are real reasons for a C-section. So I was very clear at that point, which brought me a lot of peace of mind, really, that if none of those things were true, if somebody was suggesting a cesarean to me, they were suggesting it for a non-medical reason, right? Some of the things that I started to learn was, and made me understand my first labor a lot better, was that cesareans are not medical, right? They're not necessarily medically necessary just because of how long we've been in labor, just because your baby is breached, just because you're dilating slower than what they want, right? Which was my situation the first time around. Just because you've had a cesarean prior to this particular birth doesn't mean that you need to have a cesarean. You don't need a cesarean because your baby might be big or how small your body might be or if you went past your due date. None of those are reasons, medical reasons for a cesarean. So I had to be educated and informed on that if I was going to be successful in this birth. And so when I started to learn about all these birthing interventions and scenarios, like, well, what if something happens? What if this happens? Or when would this be medically necessary? It really helped me become confident about my birth because nothing felt like an unknown to me at that point. It was almost like my birth plan when I started to put it together. It was like inclusive of, well, what if I had to be induced? Okay, what's birth going to look like for me if I have to be induced? How do I advocate for myself for the type of induction? If I do have to have a cesarean, what is that going to look like for me? If somebody comes and suggests breaking my water, or they come and they suggest pitocin, or they come and they suggest, whatever the case is, continuous monitoring, then I know how to advocate for whether or not that's something that I feel like is medically necessary. And I know that is medically necessary for me in that moment. So once I started to learn all those things, I was like, yeah, like if I did get transferred to the hospital, not ideal, but they're not going to be able to see me as this uneducated patient. I'm going to be a very educated patient and advocate for myself. And my husband all too, so he can also speak for me in those scenarios. So y'all know that perfect birth that I had the first time around, that that ideal birth plan and all of the other things, that looked a lot different the second time around. I did, of course, still have my ideal birth plan because why wouldn't you? We want to be working towards the ideal situation, but I also had like two other birth plans that I put together for my preferences on if anything changed. So I had my plan A, I had my plan B, and then I had my plan C, which was basically like if I had to have another cesarean, this is what I need it to look like. Because my first cesarean, I didn't know what my rights were when it came to actually having a gentle cesarean. And I didn't advocate for myself. And there's a lot of vivid memories that caused me trauma that I had to heal from just simply because I didn't know how to speak up for myself in the cesarean that I experienced. So when it came the second time around, I created actually three birth plans, right? Just in case I had to use any of them. And I could still communicate my desires and my wishes, and they could be clearly communicated and managed by my partner and my doula as well. And then after I did that, I didn't have any fear about a negative birth experience because I knew I was in control. I knew that I had thought through everything that I needed, potentially needed, and if I didn't have the answer or if it wasn't written on paper, I knew the right questions to ask. So, step three is making sure that you create that plan A, plan B, and plan C, because having those multiple birth scenarios is really going to be what puts your mind at ease and helps eliminate those fears. Only having one birth plan, unless you put your one birth plan together and you have kind of talked through it with your birth team, it's still really important, in my opinion, to have this stuff on paper, because if you can have it on paper, then in the midst of labor, you don't have to like try to remember everything, right? And it's also like unfair to put all of that pressure on your partner to be like, what did I say I wanted again? Like if I was gonna get induced, like what was my preferences? Like that's a lot of pressure. And your partner probably is not going to remember all of it. So at least if you have something on paper, we can go back to that and have something to, like go off of. And this is just one of the ways, like this is a very like snippet version of how I teach birth plans in my Work Your Birth course, but this is what is helping so many of my moms prepare for labor and have these empowering birth experiences. One of the moms who I was able to support said like it's definitely not as hard as it seems. And she was a VBAC. She was a VBAC and had a traumatic birth experience and gave birth to her daughter. Um, unmedicated out of the hospital, and she's like, it's definitely, after going through all this, it's definitely not as hard as it seems. And I was able to prepare myself. I was putting, going through this education and going through and understanding and learning all of these things was actually putting my mind at ease and helping me to not stress about things because I knew that I had control. I knew what to expect. And so when I went into labor, my labor experience that second time around, of course you can watch the story, but it was so much more manageable and empowering and pain free, really, because my mind was so free of like all of the what ifs that nothing that might have changed and that did change in my labor experience, like it wasn't a surprise to me. I just had to adjust and navigate because even though my plan A didn't go exactly as planned, like for example, I tested positive for GBS, and ideally I wanted to stay at home and labor like pretty much the whole time, but because I was GBS positive, I had to go to the birth center a little bit earlier. Um, and while that wasn't ideal, it wasn't going to completely shift my positive birth experience, if that makes sense. And then another one of the mamas who I've been able to support, she sent me a message and was like, I'm so grateful for your wisdom when I was told that it wasn't a good idea for her to give birth to a big baby. Thanks for giving me the confidence I needed to bring my sweet girl home with no fear. Her baby was like 9 or 10 pounds. And her providers were trying to tell her, like, we really probably because your baby seems really big. And her baby was big. But she was educated enough on like big babies and how rare it actually is to not be able to deliver a big baby based on like pelvis size or your body size or all these things and all these scare tactics that were used. And she had a beautiful birth experience, but she was educated on that, right? And she knew I'm very comfortable to make the decision, right? I also had an interview today on Instagram with one of my mamas who gave birth to a breech baby vaginally. She was extremely confident throughout the entire experience because she was educated. She knew exactly what to expect. She knew what her risks were. She knew how she needed to keep her body in a calm space. And she had the vaginal breech birth that so many people, including the doctors, told her was tomfoolery. Those were the words that they used. This is tomfoolery for a first time mom. But she was able to do that with no pain. So it goes to show that like even in her birth plan, which completely changed from being in a birth center to being in a hospital, knowingly giving birth to a breech baby, that there doesn't have to be fear associated with any of this stuff just because somebody else said it. If you don't have the information, of course it will be scary. But if you do, you can kind of eliminate that and plan ahead for that. So, using this approach to preparing for birth, which is what I've done and what I teach my moms, is also like how I learned to respond to some of those doubters and unsolicited opinions and negative stories, right? When I started to learn more, and then those negative stories would come to me, and people like, well, what about this? Or what if that happens? Oh, when I was giving birth, and it's like, yes, I don't want to hear those things, but now that I'm educated, I look at them and I hear them very differently. And I'm like, wow, like I'm really sorry that that happened to you, but now you get to think about it and evaluate it and think through like, oh wow, like I probably would have done that differently. Or I wonder, did she try this or did she try that? You know, because you're educated now and you know what your options are and you know all of the things that you can exhaust before, completely jumping to medication or completely jumping to an operation, right? Because you're educated on those things. So, I'm not here to like make it seem like my birth was perfect or every single mom that I've supported's birth is perfect, but everybody who I've been able to support, even though the birth wasn't necessarily the perfect plan A, neither was mine, they were all beautiful birth experiences. And but none of them would have been possible if we did not have this framework, which is what we're talking about in this webinar, because we actually thought through all of the birth scenarios that for the most part could probably happen or that there was a chance could happen, and we planned for that. So throughout my course and throughout this, whole training as well, I'm using my own experience, right? I'm not going to tell you to do something that I've never done before, or that I don't believe in and stand behind, and evidence that's evidence based. I'm going to constantly give you guys tools and easy to follow approaches to learn your birthrights, to learn your birth options, to really remove all of the fears and unknowns of birth. All of the mamas that I support go through this same process, which is why I'm so grateful to be able to share this with you because it's really going to save you a lot of time. It's going to save you a lot of energy and it's going to save you a lot of money, in the long run. I wish I would have known this the first time around because I could have saved myself on a pretty expensive hospital bill by potentially like preventing myself from actually having a cesarean if I was a little bit more educated on what I needed to do in labor. So, with all that being said, if you can take one thing away from tonight, it is that you can have a beautiful birth experience, y'all, and you can change the narrative. I don't care who tells you otherwise. If you learn everything that you need to know about birth and you put that in a plan, you think through it, there really are very few reasons that you should walk into birth feeling like there's any level of unknowns. Okay. There really should not be any unknowns for you if you educate yourself on all of the things that you know. So, the big question is how do you actually apply this framework in your own birth preparation and walk into your birth excited and educated? So, there's two options here. The first one is you can waste a lot of time and you can waste a lot of effort and energy and don't try to like go down all these Google rabbit holes and do it all yourself. And you can, but it's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of energy. And I don't know how far all of you are in your pregnancies, but there's a good chance that you could miss something because you just don't know what you don't know. And that was, again, my situation. Or you can streamline it and you can fast track it and you can become prepared in a course that actually is going to kind of bring everything into one easy to follow step by step process to give you pretty much every intervention that you could come across, every option, every birthright, so that you can save yourself time and energy. I'm telling you from experience, if I would have had that the first time around, like I did the second time around, I could have saved myself so much stress and so much trauma just because all of that information was in one place. And I would have never thought the first time around, oh, let me research what to do with my water breaks, or let me research what is the best approach or the best induction method. I never would have thought about that because I'm like, I'm not getting induced, that's not even an option for me. And I wasn't really given much time between the time I was told I'm being induced and the time that it actually happened to do any research. So if I would have had that ahead of time, I guarantee you that I would have saved myself a lot of trauma. So if you haven't seen it or heard about it already, Work Your Birth is the way that I have been able to kind of bring all of this into a very easy step by step process for you. I literally created a course that I wish that I had the first time around and what helped me have the birth of my dreams the second time around. I really want to help every single mom have all the information that they need in a comprehensive way with the tools for you and your partner to have a fearless and empowered birth, because it's not just about you, it's also about your partner, because they need to know what's going on too. You can't be the keeper of all the knowledge, which I didn't have that much knowledge the first time around, but I still was the keeper of all of it, the little bit that I have, right? So what you don't need, which again, I'm just speaking from my own experience, is like following all these Instagram pages and thinking like that's going to be enough. And you also don't need like the 5 to 10 minute appointments thinking like that's going to be enough. What you do need is like how to know how to navigate like all of the different birthing scenarios. Sorry, y'all, there's something in my throat. An easy to follow process. And then like how do you actually approach this differently? Because there's so many people who've never been through this. So it's really hard to get this information from other people and have this like expert advice and guidance, because even including myself, like I had to start to lean on the other moms who gave birth at this birth center for me to have encouragement, and to really lean on my doula and my midwives because they had seen this before. None of my family members had seen this before, or my friends. So it was really hard for me to ask advice or to go to them because they had never accomplished what I was trying to accomplish. So having this space, I created this space because this is what I needed the first time around to be able to have a beautiful birth experience that I was able to accomplish the second time around, but it was because of all of these tools. This course is not a typical childbirth education course. I want to be very clear about that. It is not like you come, you know, you take the course, you get the materials, but you hear from nobody and you have these questions. Like that's not it. I'm constantly walking alongside of you in this whole process, because this is not a place for you to just say, "Oh, I took this course," right? Just listening to the material is like 50% of the work. Listening to it is great, but then you have to apply it and you have to believe in it. You have to believe in yourself, right? This is not a course for people who just want to listen and just think like it's going to happen. You actually have to do the work. And I make it very easy for you, but you have to be committed to the process of preparing yourself. And it's also not just like everything that I've already shared on social media. It's taking all of that stuff and going deeper and then including so much more from like a holistic perspective. So mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, for your partner, what does your partner need to know? My husband and I also did like a whole course together that's in the course so that your partner knows like this course is literally like you have a virtual doula, right? You are going to have a group coaching program so that you will be able to go through all of the videos with me and come and ask questions in a live Zoom call environment like this, except we would actually be able to talk. It is going to be a place where you and your partner will get any and every question answered. You will be able to have access to this for a very long time, and you and your partners are going to be able to walk into birth and postpartum with all of the information, with activities that you guys have already practiced, things that you've already done, where you've literally like, you have even a cheat sheet of like how a doula would literally be walking through this whole experience. And now you kind of get to look through the eyes of a doula and really coach yourself on knowing exactly how, if I was your doula, I would be coaching you through this whole experience. So keep those things in mind if that's something that you are, looking for and you're like, I really want all this information and I feel like I've done so much googling, but I still feel lost. Trust me, I've been there. I want to give you a bird's eye view of what you're going to learn in this course. You're going to go through mental preparation, because if you're not mentally prepared for this birth, I promise you it is going to show. And that's what showed for me in the first time. I thought I was mentally prepared. And until everything changed, I thought I was mentally prepared. And then everything changed, and I was like, oh gosh, what just happened? And now I'm like, oh, I don't know what to do anymore. Okay. We're also going to go through the stages of labor and your birthrights. We talked a little bit about your birthrights today just to kind of see what y'all knew, but you also need to understand the stages of labor. My husband is a firm believer that if you do not know the stages of labor, especially as a partner, it's going to be really hard to support your partner through labor. And I firmly agree with that, because if you don't understand what to expect from early labor, active labor, what it looks like, how to know if mama's like in active labor without having dilation checks, right? Your cervical exams, it could be a little bit overwhelming, right? But you need to understand that process, and so we talk through that. Your birth plan just literally went through like a snippet version of that, what your options are, how do you create this plan A, plan B, and plan C? And then physical preparation, right? You need to understand how to move. You need to understand labor positions. Listen, y'all, just like squatting and lunging throughout the entire labor is not that's not the answer, okay? I did it. I was on hands and knees. I was on my birth ball in my first labor. And when I tell you that it was like good because I was active, but it wasn't like laboring smart. I was laboring harder because I did not know that I needed to be doing certain things and moving my body in certain ways during certain parts of labor. And usually my body would tell me that. So I put a whole cheat sheet together. I go through all of the labor positions with you so that you and your partner know, and your partner can coach you if you don't have a doula through this whole experience, the physical side. And so I include all of that in the course because, again, I'm constantly adding material, because if there's something that I learn and I'm like, wow, I'm going to use that with my clients that I didn't know already, you need to know it too. That's just the plain simple truth, right? Even if I'm not your doula, you still need to know this information, because your doula may not know it, or your partner may not know it, or it's going to be helpful information for your partner to use if you don't have a doula. So between that, we're going to go through the course together. In the course, again, you're going to have 4 weeks of virtual coaching with me so that you can get all of your questions answered. We can go through the course together. You can get feedback on anything that's happening throughout the 4 weeks of the course. And then you have access to like a Facebook group and you can ask questions after that. We're also going to be starting a support group. So after we go through the coaching and everybody's taken the course, we're going to just have a safe space to just talk and to share what's on our hearts. And if we're going through fears or we're going through things and we just need a space for other pregnant women who understand and who've been trained and have the same mentality about birth, it's a good place for you to have those conversations versus talking to a friend or a parent or a family member and they're like, "Yeah, but like, you don't have to do that, right?" You don't. You can do whatever you want, but again, it's helpful to just be around like-minded moms in pregnancy, and that was really what helped me through my second labor. And then of course, I told you before there's a cheat sheet, so it's like a doula cheat sheet and kind of helps your partner coach you through when do you move, how do you move during different parts of labor. Of course, I told you about the partner crash course. So my husband and I did a how to prepare your partner for during pregnancy to support you, how to prepare your partner during birth to support you, and in the postpartum, because sometimes it's helpful for your partner to hear from a partner and not from the mom. And then I also include because I want you to be prepared for postpartum because that's when life really begins and things get like, okay, what do I do? How do I breastfeed? What about all of these things? And how do I get my baby to be calm and not cry? Those are things that you need to know too. So there's a mini course in there about postpartum and breastfeeding. And of course, we're still constantly still adding material to that. So what I am offering tonight, for those of you who are pregnant and are interested in taking this course, I did do a like opening day, launch day discount. But because y'all are here, and I know some of you guys joined in a little bit late, which is fine because this will be recorded and you can watch it again. But for tonight only, because this is the last time I'm going to be offering it for the rest of the year. Just with the holidays and everything coming around, I want to make sure that we schedule those coaching calls before Christmas so that we can get through those coaching calls and make sure that you guys finish the course before Christmas. And then, of course, we can still continue to work together. And then after those coaching calls, after Christmas, we'll start our support group calls that you're more than welcome to join in. There is like an unlimited number of calls that you can join in. But tonight, I am letting you guys kind of have that day one launch day discount. And I'm opening that back up again so that you guys, so that I can support you. Because I know sometimes this can be a financial investment. But I promise you that I want to work alongside of you and I want to support you, give you the most value from a doula perspective, from a childbirth educator perspective, from like a mom perspective, because this is all the stuff that I needed. And I promise like myself that if I ever went through this experience again, that there was like no amount of money that I would not pay to make sure that I had this positive birth experience. Because again, and I don't believe that any of you are going to have traumatic birth experiences because you're here and you're trying to prepare yourself. But for me, it's like if I could have just invested, and I chose against getting a doula the first time around because I was like, no, I got this. We interviewed somebody and she was amazing. And we're like, no, I got this. I regretted it immediately after, like, I should have just invested in the doula because I needed her in that moment, and at that point, I was, like, being a little bit frugal and just looking at our budget about other things, but in the long run, it was almost like that money is now going to therapy that I could have just spent with my with a doula is now going to therapy so I can heal. And it's now going to this hospital because I just had this super expensive operation that could have been avoided if I just had support, if I was just educated. So this has been my mentality around birth, and I know it may not be everybody's, but I just want to make sure that, for all of the value, and I'm constantly adding to this course, that you guys have the opportunity to actually be a part of that and to take part in this course and to have access to it throughout your entire pregnancy. You have access to the course for a year. So like I said, I'm constantly adding things, especially for the postpartum, that you guys will benefit from. I promise you that if you take it seriously, and you learn and you and your partner go along, the course together, you will be able to share these same sort of birth experiences that I was able to share with you already with some of the moms. So I will say this, if you do want to have an empowered birth, that's usually not the question after you take the course. It's like, no, of course I'm going to have an empowered birth. Like the question ends up being like, how many times am I going to want to do this again? I left my first birth experience, or my second birth experience, and I told my husband, I was like, I want to do this again. And he was like, girl, what? But I'm like, yes, please. And I'm like still trying to convince him to let me do it again because it was so empowering. So y'all just like keep me in your thoughts and prayers so that we can do this again one day. But anyways, I say all that to say, if that's something that you're interested in, you can I will put the link in the email that I send out right after this, along with obviously the birth plan template. But if you go to my page on my Instagram, it's also in the emails that you probably already received from me. But the course is open until Sunday. The discount code for tonight only is birth plan. So if you go to check out the course, and you just type in birth plan, you will get a discount, the same discount that I offered on the first day. And this course is split out into 4 weeks worth of content, just so it's like a little bit more digestible for you to go through. And we'll have, of course, 4 weeks of coaching calls. But I do want to mention that just because it's 4 weeks, this is a self paced course. So you can finish this as quickly as you want. So for those of you who might be 36, 37 weeks, and you're like, I don't have 4 weeks, I've had many moms who have done this program like late in their pregnancy, and they like register for the course and they finish it in like 3 days. They go through it in a whole weekend. And so, of course, we still are able to ask questions and answer questions. And I can do one off consultations with you if you're not able to join all of the coaching calls. But just know that that is a reality. Even though it's split out into 4 weeks, like you can still finish it as fast as you want to. So my recommendation is to finish it over 4 weeks, just so you don't have to like cram so much information in like 3 days. But you need the information one way or the other. So whether you take 3 days or you take 4 weeks, this is going to help you have like that solid birth plan plus more. So I hope that that's helpful. But I really just pray that y'all have an amazing birth. Remember, like, in order for you to be ready, you have to invest in yourself. Like this, just like with everything else, invest in yourself, put the work in if you want to see the results. I promise you, like from my experience, that and the moms that I've been able to support, it really does pay off. So, with that being said, I will send the link out if you don't have it already to register and enroll. Of course, our coaching calls will start on November 29th. So you have, Thanksgiving to get through week one. Um, and then we'll start our coaching calls on November 29th, and you'll have access to all of the stuff immediately. But I want to open it up for a few minutes to see if there are any questions about anything that we talked about tonight. Again, the code, and I'll put this in here for you guys in the chat, is birth plan, and that will expire at midnight tonight. So just make sure, of course, the course will still be open after today. It'll close enrollment on Sunday, but if you do want a little bit of a discount, you can utilize that tonight. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat right now and I'll answer them. I probably have time to take a couple of questions. But I'm so grateful. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Thank you for supporting me and supporting, your own selves in preparing for birth, because of course, this is you don't get a do-over with this. And it's like it's one of those moments that can really like have you on like cloud nine, or it can really have you like feeling really down and, hurt and disappointed. And I don't want that for anybody. Even if your birth plan changes, like again, even if it changes, it doesn't have to be like, I'm disappointed and I'm sad. Like that, like I've had plenty of clients who have changed and they still were like on cloud nine because they were like, I knew this and I was prepared for this. And I made these informed decisions for this birth to switch it from my original birth plan, and I feel very confident about that. So they still had beautiful birth experiences even though it changed. Um So the question is, can it still be a good idea to take this course if my placenta previa doesn't clear up? My next scan is December 3rd to find out. Um, Honestly, yes, because just because although I do prepare you to have a vaginal birth, there is parts of this course that are preparing you to have a gentle cesarean if that's medically necessary for you. So I think that that's also important. The other thing about placenta previa is that there is a chance that, some of us may appear to have low-lying placentas, which was my situation as well in my second pregnancy. And so that was maybe like in my second trimester where they thought that I could potentially have placenta previa, which is, of course, a reason for a C-section. But the good thing about it is for a lot of us, not all of us, but a lot of us, when our bodies grow, our organs, grow or not grow, but they move up and out of the way, including your placenta, as like everything starts to get bigger and move and space out and spread out. So, for you, Jessica, if you want to wait until December 3rd and find out and just email me, you're more than welcome to do that and we can work something out. But for anybody else who's in that situation, most of the time, depending on how far along you are, it usually moves out of the way and it's usually not a problem. So just keep those things in mind. But the course, of course, is still going to prepare you mentally. Knowing your rights and options still matters, even if you're not having a vaginal birth. The mental piece matters the most, for, even if you're not like if you're not having a vaginal birth, like the mental piece is going to be even more important because there can be so much pressure around like trying to like do all of this stuff. Um, so the other thing is, somebody said in here, I wish I would have found you sooner. I'm due on Monday. Um, like I said, girl, you could finish this. You could get enrolled today and you could finish it. What's today? Today is Wednesday. You could finish this course before Monday if you really wanted to. So, and we can we can set up some time to answer questions. You can put all your questions in the Facebook group, like we can email about them since the calls wouldn't have started yet. But I don't want you guys to utilize like and as a first time mom, most of us are going to go past our due dates anyways. So just keep that in mind too. But of course, you have to do what's most comfortable for you. But you can finish this before Monday. You'll have access to it immediately. So I would, some information, even if you choose not to finish the whole thing, like some information is better than none. Um, and I've had people literally watching my course while they're in labor, and going back to some of these videos, like the movement videos, and like following it while they're in labor. So it is definitely still possible. So, any other questions? I have time for one more question. Okay, I think that might have been it. Okay, y'all. So I will save this, and the link to replay this is the same link that you actually used to join in here. So that will be the same link to replay. Again, birth plan is the um, discount code, and I will also be sending out my updated birth plan template after this sometime between today and tomorrow so that you guys have that to utilize. And then, of course, it goes into greater detail in the actual course. But I hope that this was helpful for y'all. I hope that you found it useful and educational and empowering because I know that y'all can do this. So have a phenomenal evening. Again, love y'all, and I'm wishing nothing but positive and beautiful birth experiences for you. So have a good night.